Welcome to CMM Off the Page, a podcast brought to you by CMM Magazine, a brand of Care Choices Limited. Guest speakers will equip listeners with take-home advice to support best practice in the social care sector. The podcast is available to listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and to watch on the CMM website. We hope you enjoy this latest episode. This episode is sponsored by Blue Stream Academy.
Do you find staff training a nightmare? Wake up. Blue Stream Academy offer a no-nonsense approach to staff training. Achieve CQC compliance and take full control of a comprehensive library of e-learning topics. Join over 250,000 trainees at over 5,000 organisations, managing their training year on year. Sign up today and quote CMM10 for your 10% discount. Blue Stream Academy, your training, your way.
Hi, hello and welcome to CMM Off the Page podcast. I'm Olivia Hubbard, the editor at CMM, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Nadra Ahmed CBE. Nadra is the executive chairman of the National Care Association, and Nadra is also the chair of the Care Provider Alliance. CMM Off the Page is a provider-led podcast, so it's fantastic to also be joined today by Raj Sehgal, and he is the managing director at Armscare Ltd, which is a dedicated care group based in Norfolk, specialising in dementia care. And we're also joined today by Anita Astle MBE, and Anita is the managing director at Wren Hall Nursing Home, which is in Nottinghamshire, and also specialising in dementia care. So welcome everyone, it's fantastic to have you join us today. Today's podcast will be focusing on workforce training in particular, and we'll also be touching on recruitment and retention. And also Raj has got a particular an interest and also strength in his care setting around international recruitment. So we'll be hearing about how that's going for him in the care setting. So fantastic to have everyone join us. How is everyone doing today?
Good.
Thank you. I think like everyone working in our sector, it's one big roller coaster. I think lots of fun, lots of challenges, but enjoyable at the same time.
Rewarding, isn't it, Anita? That's the thing.
Yeah,
that's the reason we keep
rewarding.
doing it, because
Yeah.
it's the people that you're caring for that make the difference, and actually the teams, working together. So 7 days a week. A weekend is any day that you can get a time out.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anita, what sort of in terms of your training at the moment, what are your current experiences of training the workforce and the challenges?
So I think the main the experience is that we have a workforce that some of our workforce, and Nadra talks about the 3/3. So a third of the workforce that is very stable, so has been with us for many years, probably, 3 years and above.
Yeah.
There's then a third of staff potentially who have been with us for completed their probation, and they're up to say 2 years, and then they will then leave because they think there's something better, or it's in their plan that that's what they do. And then there's the third of staff that probably don't even make probation. So they start with us and they leave very quickly because they realise that this sector isn't for them, or this type of work isn't for them. And I think one of the things that we found through COVID is because the country shut down, because there wasn't work anywhere else unless it was in health and social care, even hospitality ended up closing down at one point. So many people came into care believing they could do the job. But once the country opened up again, they very quickly left because they wanted to go elsewhere. So induction training is something that we have to do, and it costs. There's a significant cost with it. Skills for Care will say that, actually the process of recruiting and getting somebody through their induction probably costs about £8,000 per person. Wow. So it's not a cheap exercise. And then if we lose those people, then that's money that's gone down the drain, and they're potentially people that we could have nurtured to be, you know, valuable members of our team. So I think it's about finding the right training, the right way to train people. And most of the people that come into care aren't used to sitting down and reading. They may not even like doing online training. So face-to-face training is probably what they prefer, and it's trying to get the right balance for them. And whatever mode of training you use, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's online, it's costly.
And also not obviously cost, but also time heavy as well.
Yeah.
And so how are you structuring that training then, Anita, in terms of, you know, having the staff to oversee it and assess and to make sure that obviously it's obviously happening and is, you know, being fulfilled?
So one of the things that we're doing is we've identified key people that can mentor and mentor well.
Okay.
So we're using a blended approach. So some of our training is online, some of it is face-to-face, but a lot of it is on the job training. So working alongside a mentor who is an experienced, skilled member of staff who follows best practice, you know, doesn't cut corners, does the right thing, and is knowledgeable and explains what and why they are doing whatever it is that they are doing. So I often say to staff, if somebody tells you, well, we're doing it because we've always done it this way, then the person probably doesn't understand why they're doing it. And because we've always done it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do.
No, I think everyone's had that saying before, haven't they?
So, you know, I very quickly inform our new recruits that if somebody says, well, we've always done it this way, then they need to question that more, because that is not a valid answer to justify why we're doing something. So we've found that mentoring people works really well. We've found that showing staff that we value them reaps benefits, really. And many of our staff aren't used to training, find it a bit of a bind initially. But once they become used to it and they can see how they're progressing, they do value it, and they do then start to yearn it, you know, want more of it and chase after any opportunity that's offered to them.
And I think as well that's where that, you know, career pathway comes into play, doesn't it? And aiding retention, because I think, you know, if someone starts training, if they can see there's a longer journey ahead, and, you know, and they can see that they're also going to be invested in, I think that makes a big difference. People are going to commit.
Absolutely. I think the career pathway is something that we've got to really move on. I mean, this has been talked about for such a long time, and I don't see what the barriers are. We can, you know, it's not beyond us to be looking at what that curriculum might look like, and we have Skills for Care around to do part of that. And I remember talking about that. Both Anita and I were sat around the Skills for Care board for many years, and it was always a piece of conversation. We've just got to move that, and I think, you know, the domestic workforce element will come from there. But of course, we're not attracting that domestic workforce as much, and Raj has gone down the route of international recruitment. So I think that is an option, isn't it, Raj, that people can look into for the smaller providers as well, if that's possible.
Yeah, so in terms of training, we've followed a very similar approach to Anita. We've got a blended approach where we have the online training that covers about 30 of the sort of mandatory courses. We then also have mentors in each home, or champions, if you like, that sort of focus on that element and make sure that all the staff understand what they're supposed to. And then on top of that, we have another person that sort of comes in, and she basically spends about 10 hours in each home and goes around just observing the staff. And she's more like their friend rather than a sort of a teacher, if you like. She'll sort of
Yeah.
see what they're doing, try and correct them, talk to the champions and say, look, this is how we do it, you know. So it's more of a sort of hand-holding exercise, and that's worked quite well for us in terms of getting staff trained. Yeah, we've also engaged in having sort of train the trainer courses, so that we've got those champions that actually know how to sort of, you know, pass that training on. And as Nadra said, we've embarked on a sort of international recruitment drive as well. So what we do is, prior to engaging those candidates, we spend a lot of time going through sort of training. And again, it's a blended approach, bearing in mind that they could be overseas, between online training, one-to-one mentoring with somebody from here on a Zoom session, for instance, and then also running sort of Zoom training sessions that relate to the online training. So, you know, they can ask questions, they can understand it better, and we can also assess whether they've understood, you know, what's on the online training. So we expect them to do all that before we embark on the recruitment process. So
yeah, that's
drive
really good.
there to learn, as it were.
That's really good, and that's gone well. That's going really well, and
that's gone really well, actually. So what we've found is that people are far more engaging when they're doing the training before, and they sort of understand it. They need to know that they've got to understand it before they get offered employment. So there is a strong motivation there. Whereas I guess a lot of people get people in and then train them after. If you train them before, and you know, you assess them on that basis, and that's worked so well that actually, you know, we've started running those training sessions for people outside as well, and we pass them on to other providers who are also embarking on the international recruitment. So, you know, when those candidates go to be interviewed by a provider, they've got a good knowledge and an understanding of how all our training is sort of compiled and what it means, and far more sort of fruitful than getting someone in that may or may not understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just picking up with what Raj said as well about sort of that onboarding process and sort of doing that initial training. I think that's where like mindset comes in a little bit, for people to really understand what the role is about, and I think that's sort of, you know, it's almost like a mental preparation, isn't it, before doing a role. You know, if you've got someone that's done a short shift, you know, and then they do a night shift, and then they do, you know, a care worker role, it's not just, you know, skills, is it, and a job description. And I think, if like with Raj, doing that early onboarding process and preparation, you know, really helps someone get into that mindset a lot earlier on. I think that's really good.
And I think also within that, we've had long discussions about the cultures that people come from and their understanding, so that they've got to be onboarded into the culture as well, because health and safety in some countries isn't as hot as it is in the UK. And so, you know, you've got to get the whole thing. It's a whole package to make it successful. I see Raj is smiling, but I can imagine, you know, that is that cultural issue about bringing people in and making them understand that regulatory framework as well.
I mean, part of our sort of onboarding and training actually encompasses that, because we've evolved in our learning as to what we need to pass on before people come here. So things like you said, the cultural differences in terms of food and just living environments, and you know, keeping warm and keeping safe. So we encompass all that within the training that we offer candidates before they sort of come here, and I think they appreciate it, and also the providers also appreciate it as well. One of the other things that we embarked on with our local authorities, something that's going to come out shortly, I think, is the Care Workers Framework, which basically assesses all the roles within the care sector and almost sort of pegs them to the health services. So basically they grade them, and then the job descriptions get assessed accordingly. And I think one of the aims is to sort of peg the salaries or the remuneration rates to the health services. And I think that is something that we've worked on with our local authority and with our sort of local care association. And I think that's something that, if it's rolled out, will be very, very useful in terms of setting pay scales and also setting that sort of career pathway, so that people can see that actually they can start off as a trainee carer, work themselves up to become a carer, then a senior carer, and then other roles within the profession. That has two effects. It gives people something to aim for, as Nadra said earlier, that there is progression, and less likely for them to sort of jump ship to the health services thinking, well, there is a career pathway, I've done my basic.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we can offer the same, I think that would be absolutely fantastic in retaining people. And I think that will come, but we've got to make sure that there is a clear sort of career pathway within social care. And I think the care workers framework that's being sort of established will go a long way to making that happen.
We also have a bit of a challenge around leadership recruitment, so registered managers. And I think, that is going to have a fundamental impact on the way services are being run.
Definitely,
so
yeah.
That in itself is a major issue for us, and there are registered managed networks, and there are lots of support around. But what we found, and we keep hearing more and more about, is, especially since COVID, I think that value piece that kind of got eroded in many ways, with some of the senior politicians' comments about our sector, has left the leaders feeling very, very much undervalued, obviously. And what that's done is we've seen an exit of registered managers. I see Anita's got a hand up. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, Anita, did you have something to add on that?
Yeah, what I was going to say is, Nadra's completely right. Through COVID, because it spanned such a long time, we have the managers, or the leaders, should I say, that were in our organisation, that were motivating, leading the team, they either remain with us or left because of COVID, burnout, etc., etc. And up and coming leaders, we were trying to develop and nurture into those roles. But there is limited training. There is training once you achieve a role. So once you become a registered manager, there's training for registered manager, there's a registered managers network, but there's nothing for up and coming leaders. And where do they go? Where do they get their support? They see other people leading and they think, oh, I can do that. But then when they step into that role, they find it extremely challenging. They find it very stressful, and they're not sure how to manage it. And often, because we've gone through COVID, because we haven't got the same expertise within our workforce that we had before, because there's less of us to do that work, then we struggle to give people the right support in many cases. So what we did is we developed a leadership program that followed on from the Lead to Succeed program that Skills for Care created. Okay, yeah. So we had staff that did the Lead to Succeed program, but although they got the knowledge around leadership and leadership styles and that type of thing, they didn't demonstrate that they had the attributes on a day-to-day basis. So that's when I said, okay, let's create our own program that refreshes their mind about what they learned on Lead to Succeed, but then walks them through what they need to do. So gradually, we supported them to lead on a project. And that project was to improve something within the workplace. So it might have been improving something for staff, it might have been improving something for our ladies and gents. It might have been improving something for the organisation. And then at the end of it, we got them to present back to us. Now, initially, they presented by talking to us. And then the next step was saying to them, right, I'd like you, Dad, to do a PowerPoint presentation. You know, each one of these steps scared the living daylights.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
You want me to present to you, and now you want me to do a PowerPoint? And then I said, so at the end, we had, our first cohort had 6 people on it. Those 6 people all did 6 fantastic projects, all which are continue to be sustainable today. And at the end, I said to them, right, tell me how you went about your quality improvement initiative. And they looked at me and said, well, we haven't done one of those. And I said, yes, you did. You did a project, and that project created improvement. So you did a quality improvement initiative. Well, you didn't tell us we were doing that. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. It's that understanding that terminology scares people to death.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we need to strip it out of it. So even though these staff had gone through the Lead to Succeed programme, which is accredited by Skills for Care, they had heard the words, but those words still scared them. They didn't think they were capable of doing it. So I had to strip that away, take them through step by step. They achieved, in fact, they probably achieved far better than what anyone expected. I certainly didn't expect them to do as well as they did. But now they have new skills that they never thought they could have. But that took an awful lot of time and effort. It took thinking outside of the box to be able to make that achieve. And that time and effort didn't necessarily cost, or it was my time and effort. So actually, you know, I didn't get paid for that input, but actually it reaped benefits. And I think that's what we need to know. We need to understand our workforce. We need to understand how we motivate them, how we support them to deliver. And once we do that, they will fly. They will achieve the best things for us and our organisations and the people within it. So that's my
no, absolutely. Oh no, thanks so much, Anita. That was that's really, really interesting. I think all leaders, if they take that approach of, it's not a one size fits all. And I think we actually had a wellbeing article in CMM latest issue about getting to know that individual and what works for them, because not everyone learns in the same way, do they, as well? So it's sort of taking that out. I'm sorry, Raj, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, post-COVID, we lost 2 out of our 5 managers, and both of those had done well in excess of sort of 10, 15 years. So it was a bit of a shock. And the primary reason was that they'd sort of run on adrenaline throughout sort of COVID. And then all of a sudden CQC returned and the quality assurance teams returned, and they felt so browbeaten that actually they thought they'd done such a good job getting through COVID without losing people, with doing everything that they could, working all the hours that they could, only to receive absolutely no credit for that at all. And both those went off to the health services. But in the meantime, what we had done, like Anita, we had a sort of management program where we offer people saying, right, you're a carer. If you want to be a senior, we'll train you through that. If you're a senior and you want to be a deputy, we'll train you through that. If you're a deputy and want to become manager, we'll train you through that. So very quickly, we had 2 people that stepped into the role that had been sort of seniors and deputies for again, a number of years. So they knew exactly the way that we operated, all our systems. They knew the local contacts, the social workers. They knew the families. So it was very easy for them to use that opportunity to step into a role and actually excel in sort of leading and taking the home forward. So what we've found is that actually, you've got to push all your staff to progress all of the time. I know a number of providers, I sort of sit with them and they say, well, we've got 4 seniors and the rest are carers, and we don't need any more seniors. But actually, my thought is that actually you can't have enough, because you want all your staff to be better trained and more responsible. Because if somebody goes on holiday, you want someone to be able to step in and do the meds, for instance. So in one home in particular, we've got like 18 seniors and only 2 carers, and that's because they've progressed through. And yes, you have to pay them more, but we don't have any issues in terms of if someone's off and someone's got to cover. They're all seniors, they're all experienced, they all know what they're doing, and the team works so much better. So in terms of investment in training and developing the people that show the enthusiasm, it's so important to push them forward and sort of pull them up to a level where, it makes the managers and the providers' lives a lot easier, a lot simpler when they've got that calibre of staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Nadra, I just wondered if you had some any signposting for any resources, and obviously Skills for Care website, but just beyond that, any of your sort of insights that you're hearing about in terms of training and resources to support providers over the coming months?
You can look at sort of things like apprenticeships as well. Apprenticeships work. I think people sort of assume that apprenticeships are just for people coming into the career pathway, but actually you can use apprenticeship schemes for training people from carers to seniors or seniors to managers, so that that sort of funding is available. And strangely enough, we still have access to some EU funding for many learning courses as well, which your local authority should be able to sort of point you in the direction of. If you go to your local sort of care association, they will be able to signpost you to EU funded courses which are available, and they're free as well. So there is a lot of free training about. You just got to look for it, really.
Great, thanks, Raj. Nadra, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think local authority is a good source. I think people should question their local authority, the commissioners, about what is available. In Kent, they have continued to fund the IPC training, which is free of charge to the local people, and I think there are other areas around that are doing a bit of that as well. I think just looking around and making sure that you do talk to other providers as well to see what they're doing, joining up. I know this has always been poo-pooed in many ways, but joining up to do training courses together is always a good. It doesn't have to be on the premises of one or t'other. It can be collectively done somewhere, a village hall or something like that. I think there are lots and lots of ways of doing that. But I think we've gone through some really good things about, that train the trainer course is really valuable. You can then also tell other people that you've got a trainer who could do health and safety, and they could support somebody in the community, a home care organisation or somebody else. So I think that's about learning from each other as well. We as a sector need to come together and start to do that a lot more, get a bit more collective about it. We're also pushing the NHS at the moment to say that when they're doing training, so it's worth approaching them and saying, do you have any training going on that could be helpful to us? Because in all the methodology that's being expressed at the moment about integration, about supporting the NHS, what we're trying to say to them is that you need to then be putting your hand out to us as well and saying, we've got this running in this area, we've got a few spaces for social care providers. Skills for Care, obviously, it is a resource, but there are other organisations, and for nurses, they've got their own association to go to as well. So never assume that you can't get the training. Never assume that it's going to be hard. Never go to the first trainer who's going to charge you £600 for the day either. Just look around, make sure that you're checking all of that. And worst case scenarios, organisations like NCA, we don't actually recommend trainers, but we can put you in towards somebody who will be able to help you with that.
No, absolutely, yeah. I think as well, the experience with a trainer can just make a massive difference. When I've done 2-day face-to-face courses, you know, sometimes, I mean, just make, you know, so someone can really bring something alive, can't they? And then you can still remember.
I've always been a fan. I mean, I'm an educator by profession, and you know, I remember my time, you know, lecturing at university many years ago, and that one-to-one conversation with the students was always most valuable. I'm not a fan of e-learning, but I think it is a necessity, and I think it does serve a purpose, especially when you've got to reinforce stuff. But if you can get people in a room and shut out the world to them, so they've got no distractions, you're going to get good learning outcomes.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Anita, did you have something to add?
So, I mean, I agree with everything that Nadra says about where you can go and access training. But I think we ought to, as providers, we should be using our knowledge around the needs of our staff and our service. So, for instance, where I'm based at the moment, the NHS is focusing on training, delivering training to care homes around nutrition and hydration. Now, through the benchmarking exercise that we've been doing, we're performing highly in comparison to other care homes in achieving good nutritional status for the people that we support. So nutrition and hydration training isn't something that my team need. So equally, IPC training isn't something that my team need. It's something that our local hospital rang us up for last week and said, would you like this training? And we're quite offended, I think, when we said, no, thank you, we're all right. But there are other things. So I turned around and I said, we would like some training in dermatological conditions, please. And they went, well, we don't do that training. And I said, well, can you point me into the direction of who can deliver that for us? Well, no. And I think that's it. You know, don't just think, well, because that's not on offer, you can't have it. So we've now put in a request to our integrated care board through the chief nurse to say, this is the topics that we want training for. And now they're looking to see how they're going to make that happen. So I think, you know, don't just take on offer what's available, because it might be that you don't actually need that. And that's going to be a massive waste of money, training your staff in an area that they're already knowledgeable. So I think it's about understanding how your team are performing, knowing where their dips in practice are, and bolstering that by the right training. But the right training isn't always going to be the cheapest training, or it's not going to always be the training that's on offer. However, it will be the most cost-effective training, because you're not training people in the knowledge and skills that they already possess.
I think Anita's raised a really important point in my mind as well. It's about also surveying your staff periodically to see what training needs they feel they have or need. And I think that is really important. That's a really important thing. And the other thing that Anita's just said, which is really important to bear in mind, is we've got these ICBs, we've got the integrated care boards, and they are looking at ways that they can support social care. They are funded to do both. And I think it's really important that as a sector, a lot of areas don't have a social care representative on those bodies, but that doesn't mean you can't infiltrate them. It's worth looking at what they're doing, pushing them to be supporting you for training, just as Anita's expressed, because there is money available. And you will know, I mean, I find this quite irritating, but you will know how many times they talk about they put money into social care and what those figures are, 7 billion or whatever it is. And what we've got to do is we've got to be fighting that and saying, well, it's not coming to the front line. These are ways that you could help us. And that's where we'll get those messages out. We have sponsors like, you know, people like Apetita, who sponsor NCA, will do training for you. It doesn't matter if you're not a member of ours. If you go to those organisations, they will also do free training. Boots will do free training, and there are others around. So I'm just naming those two because they came to my head. So I'll say that quickly. But you will find that even in your own locality. Going to your local pharmacist and saying we need training in medication management, if they can't do it, they might be able to get somebody who can. So just be innovative about how you infiltrate. I like that word, infiltrate. It's my day to day.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I think it's like, having those conversations and not being afraid to explore, and and if you do get a knockback, then just keep going and have those conversations. Raj, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say something along the lines that Anita mentioned, that don't take training if you don't need it. Well, I would argue that actually, if it's free and it's available, there will be somebody in your organisation that may or may not benefit from it. But the key thing is, at least you're showing your staff that actually it's available, it's ongoing, and you might just learn something new or something different. You think, well, I haven't thought of that. Or your staff, it just reinforces to them, actually, they are doing a good job. If they go into training and they don't actually need it because they're competent anyway, it does make you feel good that actually, do you know what, I am doing a good job. So there's a bit of a sort of investment in their time, I guess, in terms of doing it. But if it makes them feel better, that they're and more confident in what they're doing, I think there's a payback there. So I would say to providers that if there's anything that's free that's going, find somebody in your organisation that could or may benefit from it, even if it's just to reinforce that they're doing a good job already.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just want to add to that, Livia, which is really important, and it's just again come to my head, is that what we found when we were doing all these training sessions, and we, consistently, we had a project that we did where we over a period of time we were funded to deliver free training. What became really interesting was that when we got to the managers' networks, the managers didn't know as much as their staff when they came off the training, because they're the last people who put themselves on those basic training, courses again. They never have time to go on training courses. So the health and safety ones specifically, we found it really interesting, where some of the managers were then coming on and saying, oh, actually, we should have done that before we sent our staff on it.
That's
so
really interesting.
Managers is important. Just keep up to date with it. Attend the odd, every few years, go on your first aid training, because you do know most of it. You will know most of it, hopefully, because you're in that role. But there'll be new legislation that's come in that might not have time to assimilate and put into practice. So managers and senior carers don't always think you haven't got the time to do it. Worth doing it.
No, I think it comes back to that leading by example again, doesn't it? And also, I think if you do regular training and you obviously continue professional development, then maybe it becomes part of the day to day, doesn't it? And it's not this big scary training that the staff have to do. It's like, oh, okay, it's business as usual.
It's personal development. Yeah. It's personal development. I always used to say to my staff that anything that we put on is something that you will take away with you. It will be forever. It's your own personal development. So you will be able to use it in your own life. If you've done a first aid training course, if you see somebody who is in trouble, you're going to use that everywhere. It's not just for the care setting. Yeah. So it's about personal development. It's about how you feel about yourself. It's a qualification that people stick on walls. And that's the thing. That's the important thing. Is that we continue to develop our workforce in a way that makes them feel valued by us, even if it's not by anybody else. And we'll fight that. We'll continue to fight that fight. We need to recruit people in who can see the value of that personal development. and then they can continue to support the people. The people that we're supporting really need to be in our care services because they can't operate alone, but they can lead an enriched life. And I very often, look on the Facebook pages of people like Anita and Raj's care services, and there's some exciting stuff that's going on all the time where people are just feeling, enjoying being in that setting. It takes a lot of time to develop into that sort of person who enjoys that. So I think that personal development is the key to not only recruiting, because people do come to services where they say that we've heard you do really good training. People stay there because they feel their personal development is part and parcel of your investment in them. Those are the two things that matter. And the continuity for you as a provider is that you have a service that continues to grow and evolve and change. So I think that's important.
Absolutely, yeah. I've definitely taken up too much of your time. You're very, very busy people. I just wondered if Anita and Raj, in sort of 30 seconds, if you wanted to do a little sum up of your sort of final thoughts for providers listening on training.
I think the thing is with recruitment and retention, you've got to have an overall strategy. You can't look at one avenue. We've all been down that advertise on Facebook, go to Indeed, social media, job centres. And if it doesn't work, you've got to use a hybrid. And in our case, what's worked for us is the international recruitment method. We've got good at it. It's about a third of our workforce now, and we are in a position almost a year later where we're actually quite relaxed about staffing. Whereas a year ago, my daughter was on the floor for 70 hours a week. My son was on the floor. I was visiting care homes. We were all overstretched. So it's made a massive, massive difference. And I think you've got to have an overall strategy in terms of long-term recruitment and retention.
Brilliant. Thanks, Raj. And Anita, did you have?
I think, yes, recruitment is one thing, but retaining staff is another. And the key for me about retaining staff is to have a partnership with them. So spend time with them, get to know them, listen to their views. Training is something that we're doing all the time. And I think it's something that our staff often are quite shocked by when they enter the sector, that there's this training and it just goes on and on and on. But then they get really used to it and they crave it and they want it. So we badge it as growing our own. We bring in new people that have no qualifications. We grow our own, and we have registered nurses now. So we've been able to take people through their RQFs. They've then become senior carers. We call them care coordinators. They've then gone on to do their nursing associate training and become registered nurses. And we're hoping to have our first ACP, Advanced Clinical Practitioner, that we employ, that will be offering care out to other care homes and people in their own homes very soon. So growing our own is our aspiration.
Well, yeah, that's quite a tagline.
Yeah, growing your own. Yeah, it certainly is. I think just before we kind of close, I also wanted to just say to the people who may be watching this, don't forget your night staff. They need maybe a little bit more attention, a bit more output. And I always remember with my night staff in one of my smaller services, you say, oh God, people are up all through the night. In the end, what we did was we started to have events in the night for them, the people who would get up with dementia, and they were doing things, so it made them feel more like part of the day teams in a smaller way, but they were able to do little bits of baking with them, so you can actually do that. You can actually do that in smaller ways, but don't forget that your night staff need as much attention, if not more sometimes, because they may not see you there as much as the day staff do, and the leadership may be slightly different. So really, really remember them as well. And that's a really good key area when you're coming into recruitment, to understand the needs of the staff that you're employing into that role, because you need to get to know them.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Nadra, for adding that. That's really important. Yeah, thanks so much to Anita and Nadra and Raj for joining us today. Really, really insightful insights there, and some really good examples for everyone listening. So thanks so much for your time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to CMM Off the Page. Explore CMM's portfolio of content, including daily news, blogs, a magazine, and CMM Insight webinars by visiting www.caremanagementmatters.co.uk. To make sure you don't miss a podcast, follow CMM on Twitter @CMM_magazine and use the hashtag CMM Off the Page to join the conversation and share your feedback. See you next time. CMM Off the Page. Listen, learn, lead.